The courtroom was alive with a peculiar kind of tension that only a small-town trial could generate. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden streaks across polished wooden benches, illuminating the anxious faces of townspeople who had come to witness the proceedings. Some shifted uneasily, whispering to neighbors, while others fiddled with pens or rustled papers, attempting to distract themselves from the discomfort of waiting. In the middle of it all, Judge Harris, a stern but fair man with decades of experience on the bench, adjusted his robe and cleared his throat. His gavel, polished and heavy, sat within reach, a silent reminder of the authority he wielded. The case at hand was relatively ordinary. A theft had occurred at a local convenience store. And the accused, a nervous young man named Tom Whitaker, sat at the defendant's table, glancing around with a mixture of fear and confusion. The details of the crime were straightforward enough, or so the adults assumed, but the morning had a surprise in store that none of them could have anticipated. Off to one side, sitting quietly with her mother, was Lily, a tiny 3-year-old bundle of curiosity. Her mother, Emily, was careful to keep her close, her hand gripping Lily's small one, as if afraid she might wander off into the chaos of the courtroom. Lily herself, however, seemed more fascinated than frightened. Her large brown eyes scanned the room constantly, absorbing every detail. She noticed the glint of the polished wooden floor, the flicker of the judge's robes, the papers stacked neatly on the lawyers' tables, and most importantly, the dark, watchful figure seated near the front of the room, Rex, a town's police canine. Rex was a German shepherd, broad and muscular, with deep brown eyes that seemed almost human in their intelligence. He sat attentively next to Officer Daniels, his handler, who kept a firm yet gentle hand on Rex's leash. The dog's ears twitched now and then, picking up whispers and movements from the room, while his tail rested quietly on the floor, an elegant display of calm discipline. To the adults, he was just part of the procedure, a trained officer in a canine body. To Lily, however, he was something magical. As the judge called the courtroom to order, a hush fell over the crowd. The lawyers began their preliminary remarks, their voices formal, clipped, and serious. Evidence would be reviewed. Witnesses would testify. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that makes even the most mundane details feel significant. Amid all this, Lily's attention never wavered from Rex. She leaned slightly forward on her mother's lap, her tiny fingers curling around the hem of Emily's skirt. Every so often, she would whisper something to herself, a soft question or observation about the dog, words too quiet for any adult to catch. "Good morning, everyone," Judge Harris began, his voice echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "We are here to hear the case of the state versus Thomas Whitaker." His gaze swept across the room, lingering briefly on the defendant, the jury, and the rows of witnesses. "We ask that all participants remain respectful and attentive during these proceedings. The court is now in session." The lawyers wasted no time. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Lewis, stood and began to outline the case. She spoke with practiced precision, detailing the events of the theft and the evidence gathered by local law enforcement. The audience listened with rapt attention, some nodding along, others murmuring quietly in agreement or doubt. Lily, however, was not listening to the lawyers. Her gaze was fixed firmly on Rex, whose large head tilted slightly as he observed the room. There was something about the dog that drew her in completely. Perhaps it was his stillness, his calm presence amidst the flurry of human voices. Or perhaps it was the sense that he understood more than the adults around him. She leaned a little closer, her soft whispers now audible to her mother. "He's big," she murmured. "Is he nice?" Emily chuckled quietly, brushing a stray lock of hair from Lily's forehead. "Yes, sweetie, he's very nice. That's Rex, the police dog." Lily's eyes sparkled. She leaned even closer to the edge of her seat, as though trying to get a better view. "Does he catch the bad people?" she asked innocently. "Yes," her mother replied softly, aware that the question, though simple, was perfectly timed. The court had a strict air, but Lily's curiosity seemed to slice through it like sunlight through clouds. Meanwhile, Officer Daniels adjusted Rex's leash. "He's calm today," he said quietly, speaking to no one in particular. Nothing to worry about. But even he could sense the unusual energy emanating from the little girl. Most children her age would be squirming, fidgeting, or even napping in a parent's lap. Lily, however, sat upright, focused, and quietly observant. The defendant, Tom Whitaker, glanced nervously at the child, a faint smile crossing his face. There was something oddly comforting about seeing a child, so engrossed in a dog rather than in the seriousness of the courtroom. For a moment, the tension seemed to soften, though the gravity of the case still hung heavily in the air. As the prosecution presented their first piece of evidence, a small, stolen item recovered from a local alley, Lily's fingers twitched. She leaned forward, murmuring something under her breath. No one paid attention. Adults were too absorbed in the narrative and the technicalities. But Rex perked up slightly, his ears twitching, as though sensing her curiosity. The judge called for a brief recess, giving the room a chance to stretch and settle. During the pause, Lily inched closer to Rex, whispering again, "Did you see him?" She spoke not to anyone else, but as if expecting the dog to answer. To the onlookers, it was a curious sight. A tiny girl talking to a large, imposing police dog. Few paid attention, thinking it was mere childish fascination. But to those paying close attention, there was an unmistakable sense that something remarkable was about to happen. Emily gently held Lily's hand. "Be careful, sweetie," she said, smiling. "Rex is friendly, but you need to stay close." Lily nodded solemnly, as if she fully understood. She did not try to step away. Instead, she reached a tiny hand toward Rex's massive paw. The dog, with training instilled over years, did not move. He simply allowed the child to touch him, tilting his head and letting out a soft whine, almost like a quiet acknowledgement. The room was quiet now. Even the chatter from the audience had paused, replaced by a strange, anticipatory silence. The prosecutor raised an eyebrow, the defense attorney shuffled papers, and the judge watched with interest. Something about this little girl and this dog, in the midst of a serious courtroom drama, was captivating. It was as if the normal rules had shifted. A child and a dog held the attention of everyone, silently demanding observation and curiosity. For Lily, the courtroom was no longer a place of tension or fear. It was a world filled with wonder. She studied Rex's eyes intently, as if searching for answers. Then she whispered softly, "Did he take the wrong thing?" Her voice was barely audible, yet somehow it carried a weight that made people pause. Adults who had been debating evidence now unconsciously leaned forward, drawn by the innocence of the question and the implied insight behind it. In that moment, the ordinary courtroom transformed. The sun's rays glinted off polished wood. The murmurs of the crowd faded into hushed anticipation, and the tension of legal proceedings took on a new dimension. A tiny voice, directed at a patient police dog, had the power to make everyone judge. Jury, lawyers, and audience alike stop and wonder. It was the beginning of something extraordinary, though no one could yet predict just how profound the events of that morning would become. As the courtroom settled after the brief recess, the atmosphere shifted subtly. The sunlight, streaming through the tall windows, now cast long, warm shadows across the polished floor. Papers rustled as lawyers prepared for their next round of questions, and the judge tapped his gavel lightly, signaling that proceedings were about to resume. Everyone was ready to return to the ordinary rhythm of the courtroom, the debate over evidence, the careful examination of witnesses, the rigid dance of legal procedure. Yet in one corner, a tiny 3-year-old girl sat perched on her mother's lap, her gaze unwavering from the large, alert figure at the front. Rex, the police dog. Lily's curiosity was unmistakable. While the adults were absorbed in testimony and argument, she leaned slightly forward, her small fingers clutching Emily's hand, twisting it softly as if in thought. Her large brown eyes were wide with wonder, observing every detail of the courtroom with an intensity that seemed almost unnatural for her age. Every sound, the creak of a bench, the rustle of paper, the low murmur of whispered conversations, was catalogued and processed. To Lily, the courtroom was a world of mystery and opportunity, a place where every person, every object, even a dog, seemed to hold secrets waiting to be discovered. "Mommy," she whispered, tilting her head. "He's watching everything." Emily smiled softly, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's face. "Yes, sweetie. Rex is very observant. That's what makes him such a good police dog." Lily's lips curled into a small, contemplative smile. She wasn't entirely satisfied with that answer. She wanted more. More than what adults offered. More than explanations that made sense in their grown-up logic. She wanted understanding, the kind only comes from curiosity, intuition, and an instinctive connection to the world around her. She leaned forward slightly again, her gaze locked on Rex's attentive eyes. "Did he see who did it?" she asked softly, almost to herself. The question went unheard by most, but Rex responded. The dog's ears twitched, and his deep brown eyes met Lily's. A subtle movement, barely perceptible, but enough to signal recognition. Rex had been trained to detect behavior, scent, and tension. And in that silent, fleeting moment, he seemed to acknowledge the girl's question, as though understanding it in a way that no adult could. Lily giggled softly, encouraged by what she interpreted as the dog's attention. Meanwhile, the adults around them were focused elsewhere. The prosecutor, Karen Lewis, rose again to question a witness, a store clerk, who had been present during the alleged theft. Her voice was sharp and professional, slicing through the still air of the courtroom. She described the sequence of events leading to the theft, pointing to evidence and describing surveillance footage that showed Tom Whitaker near the scene. The defense attorney, a calm and seasoned man named Jonathan Myers, countered her points, questioning the credibility of the witness and highlighting inconsistencies in the timeline. Lily, however, did not hear any of this. All she noticed were the small details. The way Rex's tail twitched slightly when certain names were mentioned. The subtle sniffing of the air as he tracked scent and movement. The way his ears moved almost imperceptibly with each new sound. For a toddler, these observations seemed like magic. For Rex, it was instinct. But when the two were combined, something remarkable began to unfold. "Mommy," Lily whispered again, tugging gently at Emily's sleeve. "He's looking at the papers." "Do they have it?" Emily chuckled nervously. "What do you mean, sweetie?" "I think he knows," Lily said matter-of-factly, pointing toward Rex. "He knows what's missing. He can see it." Emily smiled, but also glanced nervously at Officer Daniels, who had crouched slightly to allow Rex a moment of calm. "That's an interesting observation, honey," Emily whispered. "Rex is very smart, but he's not a magician." Lily's brow furrowed slightly, the faint hint of frustration crossing her tiny face. She didn't understand why the adults were so focused on talking and arguing rather than paying attention to what she and Rex were noticing together. To her, it was clear. The dog could see something important, something that everyone else had overlooked. As the next witness approached, Lily's attention did not waver. The man, a delivery driver, began recounting the day's events in a hesitant, shaky voice. He described seeing Tom near the store, but admitted he wasn't entirely sure what happened. The adults argued back and forth, dissecting every word for meaning. But Lily leaned closer to Rex. She whispered softly, barely audible, "I think he knows." Rex's response was subtle but undeniable. His body tensed slightly, and he lifted his paw gently, resting it on Emily's lap. It was as though he was signaling that he had noticed something too. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She had seen Rex respond to commands, scents, and cues countless times before, but never like this in connection with her daughter. The courtroom began to notice the unusual bond forming in the corner. Jurors shifted their gaze, some whispering softly to one another, intrigued by the child's focus and the dog's attentive response. A few lawyers exchanged puzzled glances. Was this just innocent curiosity? Or was something more profound happening here? Something that could subtly influence the course of the proceedings? Lily, sensing she had the dog's attention, became bolder. She leaned forward, eyes wide and earnest. "He knows," she whispered again. "He saw the wrong thing taken." Emily's hand went to her mouth, stifling a small gasp. She glanced at Officer Daniels, who raised an eyebrow and nodded slightly, acknowledging the possibility. Rex's ears twitched, and he let out a soft whine, just enough to make it clear he was alert. The courtroom atmosphere subtly shifted. Adults, so used to relying on technical evidence and witness testimony, could not help but notice the unusual interaction. The tiny girl and the large police dog had created a silent moment of tension and curiosity that no one could ignore. Even the judge leaned slightly forward, observing the scene with a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Lily continued her quiet questioning. "Do you see it?" she asked, pointing toward the front of the courtroom. "Can you show us?" Rex shifted slightly, moving his nose toward a corner of the room where no one else seemed to be looking. His body language was careful, deliberate. He did not bark, did not lunge, he simply indicated, with a subtle nudge of his paw and a soft whine, that something important was there. Emily's heart raced. She glanced around nervously, realizing that her daughter's innocence and the dog's instincts might be about to reveal something no adult had yet noticed. The jury members leaned forward, curious. The judge's stern expression softened, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Even the lawyers, always cautious and skeptical, paused in their arguments, recognizing that a unique and unexpected development was unfolding right before their eyes. For Lily, the moment was exhilarating. She did not understand legal procedure, evidence chains, or witness credibility. She only knew that she and Rex had discovered something important together. Her voice, soft but insistent, carried over the quiet murmurs of the courtroom. "Show us, please." The courtroom, a place of rigid rules and carefully measured words, now held its collective breath. Everyone waited, unsure what would happen next, yet instinctively aware that this tiny girl and the patient police dog were on the verge of revealing something remarkable. And in that moment, Lily smiled. She knew, in the pure certainty of a child's heart, that Rex had seen the truth. The courtroom had settled into a quiet tension after Lily's subtle exchange with Rex. Witnesses had resumed their testimony. Lawyers argued in hushed tones, and the judge's gavel occasionally tapped in rhythm to maintain order. But for Lily, the proceedings had transformed from a tedious routine of grown-up arguments into something extraordinary. She was no longer a passive observer. She felt deep within that she and Rex were connected, partners in a silent investigation the adults could not yet perceive. Lily's mother, Emily, sensed the intensity in her daughter's gaze. "Sweetie," she whispered, brushing a loose strand of hair from Lily's forehead, "let's stay calm. Watch Rex, but don't get too excited." Lily nodded, though her excitement could not be contained. She leaned forward on Emily's lap, hands gripping the edge of the bench. Her small frame barely made a sound, yet her presence had begun to command attention. Rex, the seasoned canine officer, sat obediently next to Officer Daniels, his massive head tilted slightly as he observed the courtroom. But when Lily whispered her soft, barely audible question, "Did you see who did it?" something remarkable occurred. Rex's deep brown eyes met hers, and he responded in a way only a trained and intelligent animal could. He lifted one paw slightly, a subtle gesture that would have gone unnoticed by most, but Lily noticed. Her eyes widened. "Yes," she whispered, pointing toward the far corner of the courtroom, where a folded paper lay partially hidden behind a chair. "There it is. That's it." Emily's hand flew to her mouth in astonishment. "Lily, how do you—" She paused, realizing she could not comprehend what her daughter was perceiving. Lily's small finger remained fixed on the object, and her eyes implored Rex to confirm it. The dog responded with a gentle whine and a slight nudge toward the spot, signaling the undeniable presence of something important. The courtroom, previously filled with murmurs and procedural monotony, now held its breath. Jurors, lawyers, and spectators alike had noticed the strange, silent communication between child and dog. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure how to react to this unconventional observation. The prosecutor, Karen Lewis, furrowed her brow in confusion. "Your Honor," she whispered to the judge, "should we?" Judge Harris, a man of both wisdom and curiosity, leaned back in his chair. "Let's observe for a moment," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It appears the child and the canine officer are engaged." His eyes twinkled with interest, a rare expression for a courtroom known for its rigid formality. Officer Daniels, trained to read Rex's body language in any situation, crouched slightly. "Stay calm, Rex," he murmured. "It's okay. Show them what you found." Rex responded with a gentle wag of his tail, a subtle but deliberate acknowledgement that he had noticed something significant. Lily's face lit up with the pure, unfiltered joy of discovery. She leaned even closer to Rex, whispering again, "Did you see? Did you see the wrong thing?" Her voice was soft, almost a melody in the tense courtroom, but it carried an unmistakable clarity of perception. The adults watched, captivated by the tiny figure who seemed to command the attention of a highly trained police dog with nothing more than innocent words and gestures. Slowly, Emily realized that this was not mere play or childish imagination. Her daughter was connecting dots, noticing details, and relying on instincts and observations adults had dismissed. Emily's heart raced, a mixture of pride and nervousness. She glanced at Officer Daniels, who met her gaze with a knowing nod. Rex had indeed noticed the object Lily had identified, and the next steps could change the course of the trial entirely. Lily, sensing the seriousness of the moment, reached out her tiny hand toward the hidden paper. Rex allowed her to touch it first, his head lowering slightly in a protective gesture. She pulled it carefully from behind the chair and held it aloft. The courtroom collectively gasped. The small, overlooked piece of evidence, a receipt from the convenience store, folded and hidden, had not been considered important until now. Karen Lewis, the prosecutor, froze mid-sentence. "Where did that come from?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. She approached cautiously, examining the document. It matched the time frame of the theft, but contained a detail that had been overlooked. A discrepancy in the description of the stolen item, a detail that could significantly alter the narrative of the case. Jonathan Myers, the defense attorney, leaned forward in astonishment. That changes everything," he murmured, scanning the receipt. His usually calm demeanor gave way to surprise. The tiny act of a child noticing a hidden document, aided by the instinct of a police dog, had shifted the entire courtroom dynamic. Judge Harris looked down from his bench, his eyes widening slightly. "Well, this is unusual," he said, a trace of a smile on his face. Unconventional, but apparently effective. Officer Daniels, please confirm the chain of custody for this item. Officer Daniels nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I can confirm that Rex indicated the location of the item during the proceedings. The child's observation coincided with the dog's detection. He cast a brief, almost conspiratorial glance at Emily and Lily, acknowledging the extraordinary moment. The audience murmured in amazement. Conversations that had been about legal procedure now shifted to whispers of awe. People leaned toward one another, sharing incredulous glances. No one had anticipated that a 3-year-old could indirectly guide a police dog to a piece of critical evidence, altering the course of the case in such a tangible way. Lily, oblivious to the magnitude of what had just occurred, giggled softly. She held the paper up proudly. See? He knew, she exclaimed, pointing at Rex. Her mother's heart swelled with a mix of pride, astonishment, and relief. The prosecution and defense both paused, reassessing their strategies in real time. The overlooked evidence had revealed a discrepancy in the timeline, calling into question the credibility of previous testimonies and the assumptions that had guided the initial arguments. Lawyers whispered to themselves. Jurors exchanged glances, and even the judge appeared momentarily taken aback. All of this had been sparked by a tiny girl's curiosity and a police dog's instinctive awareness. Rex, sensing the tension and importance of the moment, remained calm but alert. His eyes followed Lily's every movement, his body language subtly reinforcing the bond they shared. The courtroom had become a theater not just of law, but of intuition, innocence, and silent understanding. The adults, trained to rely on facts and procedure, could not help but be drawn into the extraordinary connection unfolding before them. Emily, realizing the significance of the moment, whispered softly to her daughter, Lily, you just helped show the truth. Lily's eyes sparkled, but she didn't fully grasp the enormity of what she had done. To her, it was simply a moment of play and discovery, a game of noticing and pointing things out. Yet the adults knew differently. The judge tapped his gavel lightly, regaining control of the courtroom. We will proceed, but let us recognize that this is a unique situation, he said. The observation made by the child and assisted by the canine officer will be considered in the context of the proceedings. His voice carried authority, yet also a sense of wonder that reflected the sentiment of everyone present. For Lily, the rest of the trial seemed almost secondary. Her eyes remained on Rex, and her small hands fidgeted with excitement. She whispered one last question before the proceedings resumed. Do you want to help more? Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle, as if affirming that the work was not yet complete. The courtroom was now a stage for more than just legal arguments. It was a space where innocence, intuition, and the quiet intelligence of an animal had the power to influence events, challenge assumptions, and captivate the hearts and minds of everyone present. In that moment, it became clear. Lily and Rex were no longer passive participants. They were a team, and the outcome of the trial would never be the same again. The first connection had been made, and it was just the beginning of a series of remarkable events that would stop the courtroom cold and leave everyone judge, jury, lawyers, and spectators alike in awe. The courtroom, once a hum of procedural monotony, had shifted into a strange electric tension. Every whisper, every movement, every rustle of paper seemed magnified, as though the room itself recognized the significance of what had just occurred. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, clutched the small envelope she had discovered with Rex's subtle guidance. Her tiny fingers were wrapped protectively around it, and her brown eyes shone with pride and wonder. To her, it was just a simple act. She had noticed something that adults had overlooked. But to everyone else, it was a revelation. Emily's heart pounded as she glanced around the room. The jurors, previously absorbed in testimony and legal minutiae, now leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, amazement, and uncertainty. Witnesses paused mid-sentence, casting glances toward the small child and the massive dog who had just shifted the momentum of the trial. Lawyers whispered to themselves, recalculating strategies in real time. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. Officer Daniels stepped forward, crouching slightly beside Rex to maintain control and ensure the dog remained calm. "Your Honor," he said quietly, addressing Judge Harris. Rex indicated the location of this envelope. The child's observation coincided with his detection. His voice was steady, professional. It carried a subtle awe. The judge's eyes widened slightly, and even the prosecutor, Karen Lewis, seemed momentarily unsettled by the convergence of innocence and instinct that had just occurred. Judge Harris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "Let the record reflect the unusual but undeniable occurrence," he said. "The envelope discovered by the child and verified by the K-9 officer will be formally considered as part of the evidence." The gavel tapped lightly, a signal that the courtroom would move forward with this newly revealed element. But the air remained heavy with a sense of anticipation and awe. Lily, unaware of the full impact of her actions, giggled softly. "See?" she whispered to Rex. "I told you it was here." The dog responded with a gentle nudge of his nose, as though affirming her observation. Emily smiled nervously, realizing that the innocence of her daughter, combined with the dog's trained awareness, had just shifted the weight of the trial in an unprecedented way. The prosecution approached the bench cautiously, her usual confidence tempered by curiosity. Karen Lewis examined the envelope and its contents carefully. Inside was a receipt from the convenience store where the theft had occurred, along with handwritten notes that had been missed during initial investigations. The receipt indicated a discrepancy in the stolen item's description and timing, subtly contradicting some of the prior witness statements. This small, previously overlooked detail had the potential to alter the narrative entirely. Jonathan Myers, the defense attorney, leaned forward in his chair, his usually composed demeanor giving way to astonishment. This is significant," he muttered quietly, scanning the contents of the envelope. He exchanged a glance with his client, Tom Whitaker, who had been sitting tensely throughout the trial. Relief and disbelief flickered across Tom's face. The new evidence suggested that the previously assumed sequence of events might not be accurate, providing grounds for doubt that had never existed before. The jurors, sensing the shift in momentum, whispered among themselves. Their eyes frequently darted to Lily and Rex, as though the small child and the police dog were conducting an invisible investigation that adults had overlooked. Each juror's body language shifted subtly. Some leaned forward with renewed interest. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. Judge Harris cleared his throat, bringing the room to attention. "We will now examine the contents of the envelope in detail," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This evidence, previously undiscovered, may provide critical insight into the events in question." His gaze lingered on Lily and Rex for a moment, a faint smile acknowledging the unusual partnership that had altered the course of the trial. Emily whispered to her daughter, "You're helping people find the truth, sweetie." Lily beamed, still clutching the envelope, and gave Rex a soft pat on his massive head. The dog responded with a gentle wag of his tail, as if proud of the small girl's perceptiveness. The bond between child and dog had become not only a focal point of curiosity, but also an unexpected driver of justice. As the examination of the envelope proceeded, the implications became increasingly clear. The receipt indicated that the stolen item had been purchased earlier in the day by someone else entirely, and the handwritten notes detailed an interaction that contradicted prior witness statements. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward case of theft now presented a more complex and nuanced narrative, challenging assumptions that had guided both prosecution and defense strategies. Karen Lewis, the prosecutor, adjusted her glasses, her expression a mixture of surprise and professional recalibration. This changes the understanding of the events, she admitted, her tone measured but incredulous. She exchanged a brief look with Jonathan Myers, whose calm demeanor had shifted to one of cautious optimism. Both lawyers recognized that the overlooked evidence, now properly accounted for, could redefine the arguments they had spent days preparing. Tom Whitaker, the defendant, allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The tension that had gripped him since the beginning of the trial eased slightly, replaced by cautious relief. The evidence suggested that he may not have been responsible for the theft in the way previously assumed, and the credibility of key witnesses was now in question. The jurors continued to watch closely, some nodding subtly, others whispering softly among themselves. The courtroom, once dominated by procedural rigor and formal argument, had become a theater of revelation, guided not by adult analysis alone, but by the intuition of a child and the instincts of a police dog. The unusual partnership between innocence and training had highlighted a critical detail overlooked by everyone else, demonstrating that perspective, curiosity, and observation could yield results that rigid analysis might miss. Judge Harris allowed a brief pause to let the implications sink in. "Let this moment remind us," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight, "that truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources. We will proceed with this evidence fully considered, and its impact on the case will be assessed accordingly." His gaze lingered once more on Lily and Rex, acknowledging their unusual but undeniable contribution. Emily whispered softly to Lily, "You're very brave, sweetie. You found something important." Lily's smile was radiant. "Rex helped me," she said simply, as if that explained everything. The dog responded with a soft whine and a gentle nudge, reinforcing their quiet bond. The adults in the room, however, had begun to understand that the child's observation and the dog's instinct were far more than coincidental. They were integral to uncovering the truth. As the trial resumed, the energy in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Lawyers approached their arguments with renewed caution. Jurors listened with heightened attention, and witnesses seemed subtly influenced by the awareness that every action and observation could carry unforeseen significance. The previously overlooked envelope had become a pivotal element of the case, its discovery attributed not to professional investigation alone, but to the combined insight of a child and a dog. The courtroom, once governed solely by procedural authority, had been reminded that truth often reveals itself in unexpected ways. Innocence, intuition, and keen observation had collided, stopping time momentarily and redirecting the focus of an entire legal proceeding. The discovery of the unseen evidence was more than a minor procedural victory. It was a testament to the power of perspective, unclouded by assumptions or bias. A reminder that insight can come from the most unlikely sources. For Lily, the discovery was simple, joyous, and magical. She had noticed what adults had missed, and with the silent guidance of Rex, brought it to light. For Rex, it was instinct years of training, converging with careful observation. For the courtroom, it was a revelation, a moment that would linger in memory long after the trial concluded. And as proceedings moved forward, every adult present carried a newfound awareness. In the pursuit of justice, sometimes the smallest voices and the quietest instincts can reveal the largest truths. The courtroom, once a hum of procedural monotony, had shifted into a strange electric tension. Every whisper, every movement, every rustle of paper seemed magnified, as though the room itself recognized the significance of what had just occurred. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, clutched the small envelope she had discovered with Rex's subtle guidance. Her tiny fingers were wrapped protectively around it, and her brown eyes shone with pride and wonder. To her, it was just a simple act. She had noticed something that adults had overlooked. But to everyone else, It was a revelation. Emily's heart pounded as she glanced around the room. The jurors, previously absorbed in testimony and legal minutiae, now leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of curiosity, amazement, and uncertainty. Witnesses paused mid-sentence, casting glances toward the small child and the massive dog who had just shifted the momentum of the trial. Lawyers whispered to themselves, recalculating strategies in real time. The atmosphere was electric, charged with anticipation. Officer Daniels stepped forward, crouching slightly beside Rex to maintain control and ensure the dog remained calm. "Your Honor," he said quietly, addressing Judge Harris. Rex indicated the location of this envelope. The child's observation coincided with his detection. His voice was steady, professional, yet carried a subtle awe. The judge's eyes widened slightly, and even the prosecutor, Corinne Lewis, seemed momentarily unsettled by the convergence of innocence and instinct that had just occurred. Judge Harris leaned forward, resting his elbows on the bench. "Let the record reflect the unusual but undeniable occurrence," he said. "The envelope discovered by the child and verified by the canine officer will be formally considered as part of the evidence." The gavel tapped lightly, a signal that the courtroom would move forward with this newly revealed element. But the air remained heavy with a sense of anticipation and awe. Lily, unaware of the full impact of her actions, giggled softly. "See?" she whispered to Rex. "I told you it was here." The dog responded with a gentle nudge of his nose, as though affirming her observation. Emily smiled nervously, realizing that the innocence of her daughter, combined with the dog's trained awareness, had just shifted the weight of the trial in an unprecedented way. The prosecution approached the bench cautiously, her usual confidence tempered by curiosity. Corinne Lewis examined the envelope and its contents carefully. Inside was a receipt from the convenience store where the theft had occurred, along with handwritten notes that had been missed during initial investigations. The receipt indicated a discrepancy in the stolen item's description and timing, subtly contradicting some of the prior witness statements. This small, previously overlooked detail had the potential to alter the narrative entirely. Jonathan Myers, the defense attorney, leaned forward in his chair, his usually composed demeanor giving way to astonishment. This is significant," he muttered quietly, scanning the contents of the envelope. He exchanged a glance with his client, Tom Whitaker, who had been sitting tensely throughout the trial. Relief and disbelief flickered across Tom's face. The new evidence suggested that the previously assumed sequence of events might not be accurate, providing grounds for doubt that had never existed before. The jurors, sensing the shift in momentum, whispered among themselves. Their eyes frequently darted to Lily and Rex, as though the small child and the police dog were conducting an invisible investigation that adults had overlooked. Each juror's body language shifted subtly. Some leaned forward with renewed interest. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the extraordinary nature of what had occurred. Judge Harris cleared his throat, bringing the room to attention. "We will now examine the contents of the envelope in detail," he said, his voice calm but firm. "This evidence, previously undiscovered, may provide critical insight into the events in question." His gaze lingered on Lily and Rex for a moment, a faint smile acknowledging the unusual partnership that had altered the course of the trial. Emily whispered to her daughter, "You're helping people find the truth, sweetie." Lily beamed, still clutching the envelope, and gave Rex a soft pat on his massive head. The dog responded with a gentle wag of his tail, as if proud of the small girl's perceptiveness. The bond between child and dog had become not only a focal point of curiosity, but also an unexpected driver of justice. As the examination of the envelope proceeded, the implications became increasingly clear. The receipt indicated that the stolen item had been purchased earlier in the day by someone else entirely, and the handwritten notes detailed an interaction that contradicted prior witness statements. What had initially appeared to be a straightforward case of theft now presented a more complex and nuanced narrative, challenging assumptions that had guided both prosecution and defense strategies. Karen Lewis, the prosecutor, adjusted her glasses, her expression a mixture of surprise and professional recalibration. This changes the understanding of the events, she admitted, her tone measured but incredulous. She exchanged a brief look with Jonathan Myers, whose calm demeanor had shifted to one of cautious optimism. Both lawyers recognized that the overlooked evidence, now properly accounted for, could redefine the arguments they had spent days preparing. Tom Whitaker, the defendant, allowed himself a small, hopeful smile. The tension that had gripped him since the beginning of the trial eased slightly, replaced by cautious relief. The evidence suggested that he may not have been responsible for the theft in the way previously assumed, and the credibility of key witnesses was now in question. The jurors continued to watch closely, some nodding subtly, others whispering softly among themselves. The courtroom, once dominated by procedural rigor and formal argument, had become a theater of revelation, guided not by adult analysis alone, but by the intuition of a child and the instincts of a police dog. The unusual partnership between innocence and training had highlighted a critical detail overlooked by everyone else, demonstrating that perspective, curiosity, and observation could yield results that rigid analysis might miss. Judge Harris allowed a brief pause to let the implications sink in. "Let this moment remind us," he said, his voice calm but carrying weight, "that truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources. We will proceed with this evidence fully considered, and its impact on the case will be assessed accordingly." His gaze lingered once more on Lily and Rex, acknowledging their unusual but undeniable contribution. Emily whispered softly to Lily, "You're very brave, sweetie. You found something important." Lily's smile was radiant. "Rex helped me," she said simply, as if that explained everything. The dog responded with a soft whine and a gentle nudge, reinforcing their quiet bond. The adults in the room, however, had begun to understand that the child's observation and the dog's instinct were far more than coincidental. They were integral to uncovering the truth. As the trial resumed, the energy in the courtroom had shifted dramatically. Lawyers approached their arguments with renewed caution. Jurors listened with heightened attention, and witnesses seemed subtly influenced by the awareness that every action and observation could carry unforeseen significance. The previously overlooked envelope had become a pivotal element of the case, its discovery attributed not to professional investigation alone, but to the combined insight of a child and a dog. The courtroom, once governed solely by procedural authority, had been reminded that truth often reveals itself in unexpected ways. Innocence, intuition, and keen observation had collided, stopping time momentarily and redirecting the focus of an entire legal proceeding. The discovery of the unseen evidence was more than a minor procedural victory. It was a testament to the power of perspective, unclouded by assumptions or bias. A reminder that insight can come from the most unlikely sources. For Lily, the discovery was simple, joyous, and magical. She had noticed what adults had missed, and with the silent guidance of Rex, brought it to light. For Rex, it was instinct years of training converging with careful observation. For the courtroom, it was a revelation, a moment that would linger in memory long after the trial concluded. And as proceedings moved forward, every adult present carried a newfound awareness. In the pursuit of justice, sometimes the smallest voices and the quietest instincts can reveal the largest truths. The courtroom had transformed. What had begun as a straightforward theft trial now felt like a stage for an extraordinary story, one that even the most seasoned legal professionals could not have predicted. The small envelope, discovered by a 3-year-old and verified by a police dog, lay prominently on the evidence table. Its contents, a receipt, notes, and subtle discrepancies, had already forced the lawyers, jury, and judge to reconsider their previous assumptions. The air was thick with tension, a mixture of curiosity, excitement, and incredulity. Tom Whitaker, the defendant, sat at the defense table, visibly relieved but still cautious. His hands, previously clenched with anxiety, now rested loosely on the polished wooden surface. The small evidence, once overlooked, had introduced doubt into a case that had seemed airtight. Every eye in the courtroom was on the envelope, on the small girl who had discovered it, and on Rex, whose calm presence had guided the discovery. Lily, oblivious to the gravity of the situation, continued to observe Rex closely. Her small hand occasionally twitched with excitement, and her brown eyes sparkled with curiosity. She whispered softly to the dog, "We did it." Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle, a silent affirmation of their shared accomplishment. Emily's heart swelled with pride, though she could hardly contain her nervous anticipation. She realized that her daughter's innocent actions had already begun to reshape the narrative of the trial in profound ways. Judge Harris, recognizing the unusual dynamics at play, called the court to order. "We will now examine the implications of this newly discovered evidence," he announced. The envelope presented by the child and verified by the canine officer must be considered carefully in assessing the credibility of prior testimony. His voice carried authority, yet there was an unmistakable trace of amazement. The courtroom hung on his words, the silence almost tangible. The prosecution, Karen Lewis, stepped forward with her usual professional composure, though her confident demeanor had softened under the extraordinary circumstances. "Your Honor, the receipt and notes contained within this envelope introduce a discrepancy that must be addressed," she said. While the evidence was previously overlooked, its contents now require a careful review of witness statements and the established timeline. Her voice was steady, but even she could not mask the awe that underlined her careful choice of words. Jonathan Myers, the defense attorney, rose from his chair, his calm professionalism now mingled with visible excitement. "Indeed, Your Honor," he replied. "The newly discovered evidence challenges previous assumptions, particularly regarding the timeline and actions of the alleged perpetrator. It appears that critical details were missed, and this information must inform the jury's assessment of credibility and responsibility." His usually composed demeanor gave way to subtle relief, tempered by the awareness that the trial's momentum had dramatically shifted in favor of his client. Tom Whitaker let out a small breath he had been holding, almost imperceptibly. The uncertainty that had dominated his expression for the past days gave way to cautious optimism. For the first time, he allowed himself to imagine a future in which he might leave the courtroom exonerated, thanks to the unlikely partnership between a child and a police dog. The jurors, who had been silently observing the proceedings, shifted in their seats. They exchanged glances, whispering quietly among themselves, as if to acknowledge that the small details they had previously overlooked now carried extraordinary weight. The courtroom atmosphere, once tense with uncertainty, now pulsed with a quiet electricity, the anticipation of a revelation that was reshaping the perception of the case. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex, gently adjusting the dog's position. "Good job, Rex," he murmured quietly. The dog's ears twitched in response, a subtle acknowledgement of praise. Rex had remained calm throughout the proceedings, yet his keen instincts had played a pivotal role in uncovering evidence that adults had failed to notice. His silent cooperation, paired with Lily's innate curiosity, had created a moment that challenged conventional procedures and expectations. Lily, fully absorbed in the unfolding drama, whispered again to Rex, "They'll see it now, won't they?" The dog responded with a soft whine and a subtle tilt of the head, almost as if confirming that the truth was indeed coming to light. Emily held her daughter close, marveling at the extraordinary bond between child and dog, and at the quiet power of innocence and observation. The judge signaled for the next witness to be called, and the tension in the courtroom thickened. A store clerk, previously considered a key witness, now appeared nervous, aware that the envelope's contents contradicted parts of her earlier testimony. She fidgeted with her notes, adjusting her stance before stepping toward the witness stand. The adults in the courtroom, including the lawyers and the jury, watched her carefully, waiting to see how she would respond to the newly discovered evidence. Karen Lewis began her questioning with measured precision. "Do you recognize the items in this envelope?" she asked, gesturing toward the receipt and notes. The clerk glanced down, her face flushing slightly as she nodded. "Yes, I remember seeing these," she stammered. "But I didn't think they were important at the time." Her voice faltered, betraying the sudden realization that her previous testimony might now be questioned. Jonathan Myers seized the opportunity, stepping forward with a careful tone. "Would you agree, then, that the timing and description of events may not have been accurately represented in your initial statements?" he asked. The clerk hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose that's correct," she admitted. The courtroom reacted subtly, heads turned, murmurs rippled through the audience, and even the judge leaned forward, noting the unexpected impact of the child-discovered evidence. Tom Whitaker's shoulders relaxed slightly. The anxiety that had gripped him for days seemed to lift as the courtroom acknowledged that previous assumptions were being reconsidered. His legal situation, once precarious, now held the possibility of a favorable outcome. The small envelope, once hidden, had become a linchpin for re-evaluating the case, and its discovery had shifted the balance in his favor. The jurors, quietly observing every interaction, began to whisper amongst themselves, their collective attention fully captured by the unfolding drama. They watched Lily and Rex, noting the remarkable intuition that had guided the discovery of the evidence. Adults in the courtroom, long accustomed to relying solely on facts, procedures, and testimony, now found themselves witnessing a profound lesson that perspective, observation, and even the smallest acts of curiosity could illuminate the truth in ways that formal logic alone might miss. Judge Harris tapped his gavel lightly, regaining the attention of the room. "We will proceed with the understanding that this evidence is critical to assessing the sequence of events," he announced. "Let it be clear that all testimony and argument must now take into account the new information provided." His voice carried both authority and the faintest note of astonishment, acknowledging the unprecedented role of a child and a dog in reshaping a legal proceeding. Emily whispered softly to Lily, "You're helping people understand the truth, sweetie." Lily, beaming, patted Rex gently. "We did it together," she said simply. The dog responded with a soft nuzzle, reinforcing their bond and their shared contribution to the revelation. As proceedings continued, the tone of the trial shifted dramatically. Witnesses answered questions with heightened caution. Lawyers recalibrated arguments to account for the new evidence, and jurors listened intently, aware that the case they thought they understood was now more complex than ever. The small envelope, previously hidden and dismissed, had transformed the trial into a story of discovery, collaboration, and unexpected insight. The courtroom had been reminded that truth could emerge from the most unlikely sources. Innocence, intuition, and keen observation, embodied in a tiny girl and a police dog, had stopped time, captured attention, and redirected the course of justice in a profound and unforgettable way. For Lily, it was simple curiosity. For Rex, instinct. And for the adults, a powerful lesson in humility and the unexpected ways that justice can reveal itself. By the time the recess was called, the courtroom had shifted irreversibly. Conversations that had been tense and formal now buzzed with amazement. Adults discussed the remarkable partnership they had witnessed. The jurors, previously stoic and methodical, whispered in hushed tones about the extraordinary impact of innocence and instinct. Even the judge, experienced in countless trials, allowed himself a moment of wonder, recognizing that this case would be remembered not just for its legal arguments, but for the remarkable events that had unfolded. Lily, sitting quietly on her mother's lap, patted Rex one last time before the break. "We helped," she whispered. The dog responded with a gentle wag of his tail, as if agreeing. Emily held her daughter close, tears of pride and awe welling in her eyes. The smallest voices and the quietest instincts had changed the course of the trial, and the courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, the power of perspective unclouded by bias or expectation. In that moment, it became clear to everyone in the room, the trial would never be the same. What had begun as a routine legal proceeding had transformed into a story of discovery, courage, and collaboration. A case was turning, and the impact of a 3-year-old's curiosity and a dog's keen instincts would be remembered for years to come. The courtroom hummed with an almost tangible tension as the trial resumed. What had once been a straightforward theft case had become a spectacle of intuition, observation, and the unexpected influence of innocence. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, clutched Rex's massive paw gently, as if drawing strength from his calm presence. The bond between child and dog had become the center of attention, not as a distraction, but as a quiet force guiding the discovery of truth. Emily glanced down at her daughter, her heart swelling with pride. "Just be calm, sweetie," she whispered. But Lily's focus was unwavering. Her large brown eyes never left Rex, and her small hands occasionally fidgeted in anticipation. The child understood, in her own intuitive way, that the envelope they had discovered was only the beginning. More truths were hidden, subtle and delicate, waiting to be revealed. Judge Harris, sensing the unusual energy in the room, tapped his gavel lightly. "We will proceed with testimony and discussion regarding the newly discovered evidence," he announced. His voice was calm but firm, commanding attention while acknowledging the unprecedented nature of what was unfolding. The jury, previously attentive but methodical, now leaned forward collectively, their interest piqued by the extraordinary events that had captured everyone's attention. Karen Lewis, the prosecutor, stepped forward, attempting to regain control of the courtroom. Her usual confidence was tempered by a quiet sense of caution. "Your Honor," she began, "the envelope and its contents must be carefully examined in context with previous witness statements. We will need to reassess timelines and establish the credibility of prior accounts." Her words were professional, yet there was an unspoken acknowledgement of the extraordinary circumstances that had led to the discovery. Jonathan Myers, the defense attorney, rose from his chair, his calm demeanor now tinged with excitement. "Indeed, Your Honor," he replied. "The newly revealed evidence challenges prior assumptions and raises critical questions about witness credibility. We are fortunate that this discovery has brought clarity to elements of the case that were previously misunderstood." His voice carried measured relief, yet he was careful to maintain professionalism, knowing the courtroom was now fully aware of the unusual collaboration between child and dog. Tom Whitaker, sitting at the defense table, felt a surge of cautious optimism. The tension that had gripped him for days began to ease, replaced by hope. The envelope had introduced doubt into a case that had once seemed indisputable. Now, the possibilities of justice being served fairly felt within reach, largely thanks to the unlikely partnership between Lily and Rex. The clerk, previously nervous, returned to the witness stand to clarify her earlier testimony. Her face reflected a mixture of embarrassment and newfound awareness. "I realize now," she said quietly, "that some details I provided earlier may have been inaccurate or incomplete." Her admission sent subtle ripples through the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged glances, The jurors leaned forward in anticipation, and Judge Harris nodded thoughtfully. Lily, sensing the gravity of the moment, whispered softly to Rex, "They're going to see it now. The truth." Rex responded with a gentle nudge, a quiet affirmation that they were both part of something important. Emily's eyes filled with tears, understanding that her daughter's actions, though innocent and unassuming, had already altered the trajectory of the trial. Officer Daniels remained near Rex, quietly observing the courtroom dynamics. He knew that the dog's instincts had guided the discovery of the envelope, and now they were guiding the perception of the jurors and adults alike. Rex's calm, deliberate behavior lent credibility to Lily's observations, creating an almost unspoken alliance that validated their findings without a word. As the examination of the envelope's contents continued, the impact became undeniable. The receipt and handwritten notes revealed discrepancies that challenged the timeline of events previously assumed. Witness statements, once considered credible, were now questioned. The jurors shifted in their seats, whispering quietly to each other as they processed the new information. What had once been a seemingly straightforward case was now a complex puzzle of observation, testimony, and subtle evidence. Judge Harris allowed a brief pause to let the implications sink in. "It is clear," he said, "that the previously undiscovered evidence has significant implications for this case. All parties must consider its impact on the credibility of prior statements in the assessment of responsibility." His gaze lingered on Lily and Rex, a quiet acknowledgement of the extraordinary role they had played in uncovering the truth. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as the final witness was called. This individual, a store manager who had been involved peripherally, had initially overlooked key details during prior investigations. Now, faced with the envelope and the unerring observations of a child and a police dog, the manager's testimony shifted dramatically. I didn't realize," he admitted, voice trembling slightly. "These notes, they change my understanding of what happened." His words added weight to the mounting evidence, further destabilizing prior assumptions and bringing clarity to the confusion that had dominated the proceedings. Karen Lewis, attempting to maintain her composure, adjusted her approach. "We will need to reconcile these discrepancies with the timeline previously presented," she said, her voice steady but acknowledging the undeniable truth that the case had shifted. Jonathan Myers nodded subtly, the relief in his expression tempered by careful professionalism. Throughout this, Lily remained calm, clutching Rex's paw gently. Her whispers to the dog were soft, almost rhythmic. "It's okay. They're seeing it now," she said, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who knew, in a child's way, that the truth had been revealed. Rex's response, a gentle wag of his tail, reinforced their silent communication. Emily watched her daughter with awe and a touch of fear. She understood that Lily's words and observations had not only guided Rex, but had also guided the courtroom's perception of the case. Every adult in the room, from jurors to lawyers to the judge himself, had been influenced by the unassuming authority of a small child and a massive dog working in harmony. The trial neared its climax. The new evidence had forced a reconsideration of all prior testimony. Witnesses admitted gaps in their recollection, lawyers recalibrated their arguments, and the jury, captivated by the unusual circumstances, leaned forward with heightened attention. The courtroom had become a theater of revelation, with Lily and Rex at its quiet center, guiding the narrative through observation, intuition, and innocence. Judge Harris, finally addressing the courtroom, spoke with measured authority. "It is evident that the previously undiscovered evidence has profound implications for this case," he said. "The jury must now consider this new information carefully, weighing it against prior testimony and evidence." His voice carried both the authority of his position and the recognition of an extraordinary event unfolding before him. For Lily, The world was simple and clear. She had noticed something important, guided by instinct and curiosity, and had brought it to light with Rex's help. For Rex, it was instinct and training converging seamlessly with human perception. For the adults, it was a humbling reminder that truth can emerge in unexpected ways, from the smallest voices and the keenest instincts. As the day wore on, the courtroom's energy remained electric. Conversations were hushed, movements deliberate, and every observer aware that history was being quietly made. Lily and Rex had not only influenced the outcome of the case, but had also reminded everyone present of the extraordinary power of observation, innocence, and quiet courage. And in that moment, it became undeniable. The trial, the town, and everyone who witnessed this remarkable partnership would forever remember the child who spoke to a police dog, and the dog who listened, guided, and revealed truths that adults had overlooked. The climax had been reached not through argument alone, but through a combination of intuition, innocence, and silent understanding. The courtroom waited, breathless, for the final reckoning, the verdict that would honor the discovery of truth and the extraordinary collaboration between a small child and a remarkable dog. The courtroom was unusually quiet, the air heavy with anticipation. After days of tense proceedings, unexpected revelations, and the remarkable contributions of a 3-year-old child and a police dog, it had finally come time for the jury to deliver their verdict. Every seat was filled. Spectators leaned forward with bated breath, and even the court staff seemed acutely aware that they were witnessing something extraordinary. Lily, perched on her mother's lap, clutched Rex's massive paw with both hands. Her wide eyes scanned the room, full of innocent curiosity and quiet determination. She seemed completely unaware of the historic significance of the moment, but her presence, her insight, her courage, and her unwavering attention had already reshaped the course of the trial. Emily whispered softly to her daughter, brushing a stray strand of hair from her forehead. "You've been so brave, sweetie. You helped everyone see the truth." Lily nodded, a small, serene smile spreading across her face. "Rex helped me," she said simply, leaning closer to the dog. Rex responded with a gentle nuzzle, his warm, intelligent eyes reflecting the gravity of the moment in a way that no human expression could match. Judge Harris, aware of the unprecedented circumstances, adjusted his robe and cleared his throat. "Members of the jury," he said, his voice calm but firm, "you have heard all the testimony, examined the evidence, and witnessed the extraordinary discovery of previously overlooked materials. It is now your responsibility to deliberate and return a verdict based on the evidence before you, both conventional and newly revealed." The judge's gaze lingered briefly on Lily and Rex, a subtle acknowledgement of their unique contribution to the unfolding justice. The jury filed into the deliberation room, their expressions solemn and thoughtful. Behind closed doors, the weight of the case, combined with the profound influence of the child and dog's observations, began to guide their discussion. What had once seemed straightforward was now a complex tapestry of timelines, witness credibility, and the subtle but undeniable evidence discovered by a tiny observer and a loyal police dog. Each juror, seasoned in the ways of logic and law, had been forced to confront the extraordinary nature of truth and how it can emerge from the most unexpected sources. Minutes felt like hours in the courtroom. Lawyers exchanged quiet whispers, jurors shifted in their seats, and spectators held their collective breath. Even the air seemed charged with anticipation, as though the building itself recognized the importance of the moment. Emily held Lily close, stroking her hair gently. "Whatever happens, you've done something amazing," she whispered. Lily's eyes sparkled as she patted Rex's head. "We just helped," she said. Finally, the jury returned, their faces a mixture of solemnity and quiet revelation. Judge Harris nodded to them, signaling the start of the verdict reading. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the walls seemed to absorb the gravity of the moment. The foreperson, a middle-aged man with a calm but deliberate demeanor, stood and began to speak. "Your Honor, after careful deliberation and full consideration of the evidence, including the recently discovered materials, we have reached a verdict," he began. Every ear strained to hear, every eye fixed on the small child and the massive dog who had inadvertently but profoundly shaped the case. "We find the defendant, Tom Whitaker, not guilty of the charges presented." The courtroom erupted not with chaos, but with a mixture of astonishment, relief, and quiet admiration. Gasps, whispered exclamations, and relieved sighs filled the air. Tom Whitaker sank into his chair, disbelief and relief washing over his face. For days, he had been consumed with fear and anxiety, convinced that the verdict was beyond his control. Now, thanks to the observant eyes of a child and the instincts of a dog, he was free. Emily hugged her daughter tightly, tears streaming down her face. "You did it, sweetie. You really helped," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. Lily's face lit up with the pure joy of accomplishment. "We did it, Rex," she exclaimed, her small hands clinging to the dog's fur. Rex responded with a low, contented whine and a gentle wag of his tail, as if acknowledging their shared triumph. Judge Harris allowed a brief moment for the courtroom to absorb the verdict, then spoke. "This case serves as a remarkable reminder that truth can emerge from unexpected places," he said, his voice carrying both authority and wonder. "It has been influenced by observation, intuition, and courage in ways that transcend conventional expectations. Let it be recorded that this trial will be remembered not only for the legal proceedings, but for the extraordinary contributions of those often overlooked, sometimes even the smallest among us." His gaze fell once more on Lily, whose innocent smile seemed to illuminate the room. Corinne Lewis, the prosecutor, composed herself, though even she could not hide a hint of admiration. She approached Tom briefly, acknowledging the jury's decision with professional grace. Jonathan Myers, the defense attorney, allowed himself a rare smile of relief and pride. "Extraordinary," he muttered quietly under his breath. "Absolutely extraordinary." The courtroom slowly began to settle, the formalities of the proceedings giving way to quiet reflection. Spectators exchanged amazed glances, whispering about the remarkable chain of events they had just witnessed. Children in the audience stared wide-eyed, perhaps inspired by Lily's courage and clarity. Adults were humbled, reminded that insight, honesty, and observation are sometimes found in the least expected places. Emily, still holding her daughter, glanced around the room, marveling at the extraordinary journey that had led to this moment. From an overlooked envelope to the quiet guidance of a loyal dog, the path to justice had been unconventional, yet undeniable. "You'll never forget this, will you, Lily?" she whispered softly. Lily shook her head, hugging Rex tightly. "I just wanted to help," she said, as if that simple truth explained everything. Officer Daniels knelt beside Rex, patting his head affectionately. "Good work, buddy," he murmured, acknowledging the dog's calm but critical role in the trial. Rex responded with a gentle wag of his tail, eyes bright and alert, as if proud of the quiet but profound impact he had made. The courtroom gradually emptied, but the story of that day would linger far beyond its walls. Journalists, legal professionals, and townspeople would talk about the 3-year-old who spoke to a police dog and the dog who listened, guiding adults to see what had been overlooked. The trial, once a simple legal proceeding, had become a story of collaboration, courage, and the quiet power of observation. Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed, reporters jotted notes furiously, and people stopped to marvel at the unusual yet inspiring tale. Lily and Rex, now the center of attention beyond the courtroom, were quietly guided by Emily and Officer Daniels through a crowd of admirers. Despite the commotion, Lily's focus remained on Rex, whispering softly, "We helped, didn't we?" The dog responded with a gentle nuzzle, reaffirming their partnership. That night, Emily tucked Lily into bed, still marveling at the day's events. "You changed the world today, Lily," she said softly. Lily smiled sleepily, her eyes heavy with fatigue. "We just helped," she murmured before drifting into a peaceful sleep. Outside her window, the city seemed to carry a quiet energy, a sense that justice had been served not only by procedure, but by the unlikely collaboration of a child and a dog. In the weeks that followed, the story spread across the country. News outlets featured the extraordinary partnership, highlighting the innocence and perceptiveness of a small child and the remarkable instincts of a police dog. The trial's outcome became a case study in observation, collaboration, and the subtle ways in which truth can reveal itself. Rex, now celebrated as much as Lily, continued his work as a canine officer, but with a newfound recognition of the quiet power of trust and collaboration. Lily, inspired by her experience, developed an even sharper sense of curiosity and empathy, aware that small acts of observation could change lives. And in that moment, as the story settled into legend, one truth remained undeniable. Sometimes the most profound revelations come from the smallest voices, the quietest instincts, and the courage to notice what others overlook. In the end, justice had been served, not solely by law, but by heart, intuition, and the remarkable bond between a child and a police dog. The courtroom had witnessed history. The town had witnessed history. And the world, through the retelling of the story, would remember forever the extraordinary day when a 3-year-old spoke to a police dog, and the words they shared stopped everyone cold.